Good morning. I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukrainian Media Center Ukrinform. My name is Olga Atamanova. Today is day 615 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor. It's been 10 years of the war, and today we will be talking about support of our veterans community, about the projects that will reinforce and help our veterans. So today we have invited you to visit this press conference by Ukrainian Veterans Foundation in coordination with the ISAR, Yednannia Foundation, who launched a new project together. Our speakers today are Ruslana Velychko-Trifonyuk, First Deputy Executive Director of the Ukrainian Veterans Foundation of the Ministry for Veterans Affairs. Also joining us is Volodymyr Sheygus, Executive Director of ISAR Yednannia, and Oleksiy Tarabukin, Communications Advisor to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. So good morning, dear friends. Ms. Ruslana, traditionally we would like to give the floor to you. We are happy to see you when we launch the projects which empower our veterans, which help them to get reintegrated back to civil life. So let's talk about this project, how important it is, what civil organizations can get involved, and what is the goal of the project. Good morning, everybody. I know that we had a lot of civil organizations registered today among those who would like to hear this news, and I hope they're watching us online. So first of all, I would like to explain it for them. Ukrainian Veterans Foundation launches a contest for civil organizations, not for the first time, but since we are a government institution, we had certain restrictions in terms of support of some expenses for funding expenses, such as like administrative expenses and so on. So we, in coordination with ISAR Yednannia, currently co-fund the project for those civil organizations to make sure that those civil organizations which work with the veterans with their adaptation and reintegration could be funded to bear administrative expenses, organizational expenses, and other expenses that we as a government institution unfortunately are restricted to fund from our budget. However, I really appreciate the input of all of the civil organizations that will submit for our contest. We understand that it's not so easy to work with the reintegration and adaptation of the veterans. Those are the civil organizations that extend a lending hand, that offer their support to the veterans to have them reintegrated in their civil lives. And we've seen a number of such projects who, for example, issued comic books for children, like my mom and my dad came back from war, and where they explained it for the children why the emotional condition, emotional state of their parents may have changed. And there is a number of organizations which mentor veterans businesses, and we appreciate that too. We have programs to support veterans businesses, and in fact they, by their activities, support us a lot, relieving us from a lot of workload, thus supporting veterans businesses. Also, I would like to mention that it's a normal practice when civil organizations work to have the veterans reintegrated. For example, in the United States, the majority of civil organizations provide social services for veterans at the expense of the private donors and international organizations. So I think that these programs that we have in place, they sort of cover for each other. In Ukrainian Veterans Foundation, they support each other, and it's quite a good tendency for development of such a system on our end. Ms. Ruslana, so let's explain it to our civil organizations. Will it be support for some project, specific project, or for operational activities of civil organization itself? Well, we are going to publish the instruction, which will be available to everybody, to make sure there are no additional questions about this. So Ukrainian Veterans Foundation, in coordination with ISAR Yednannia, we will support specific projects. So we, as a Veterans Foundation, we will support the project, and ISAR Yednannia within that project will extend funds for organizational development. And probably I don't have to tell this for you, Mr. Volodymyr. Yes, Mr. Volodymyr, so probably let's talk about this a little bit. Good morning, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me here. So we're talking about the support of the veterans and their families and friends. We expect the number of veterans to grow. We are preparing to have more and more participants of this movement, and they will require even more support than today. So we were talking today that it's a contest of projects, which means that every organization offers a goal to be developed, and they will aspire to that goal through the activities that will be offered. Us as an organization, as a granting organization, we usually support the projects on a complex basis. I mean, those projects that require proper accounting, management, participation of the people, payment for works, procurement, to make sure that the work is done in an efficient way. So for me, that contest implemented by Ukrainian Veterans Foundation in coordination with us is also of complex nature. It's just that those expenses that were not allowed or were allowed to a limited extent will be covered additionally. So the idea to be offered should be implemented, and all of the expenses are supposed to be covered. So this is the complex nature of its approach. Talking about the work and cooperation, we do not restrict ourselves with the financial participation, but we will also provide other types of support to civil organizations who will submit their proposals, or those that will be picked for funding, to support them in their development and in their better understanding of how things work. Because what is the civil organization? It's when people unite to achieve some goals, when something is present for them. And there is a lot of pressing issues in Ukraine for the time being, and it means that there may be a lot of civil organizations, because such civil organizations on the stage of their foundation, they don't cover the work of, say, even some category of people they work with, and they provide some specific service, maybe 2 or 3 services, for the sake of which they united from the very beginning. So there will be a number of organizations providing different kinds of services. Some may provide services, some may advocate the interests of their target audience, some may be helping the families of the veterans, of the warriors. Some may be promoting some narrow topics the civil organizations are going to face. So basically the people unite and take obligation in front of their target audience they work for, and respectively, if they are a civil organization, such an organization requires proper management and development. Frequently it happens so that people unite and they think that if they implement proper social initiatives which are of demand in the society, someone will support them, someone will fund their activities. So it doesn't really happen so in life. Even if it's a volunteer movement, veterans movement, well, there are funding capabilities, but the priorities change with time and civil organizations remain, and if they don't develop, they won't be able to sell themselves. You know, like people say that sometimes you have to sell yourself to get more attention, more influence, or to raise funding. So us as a civil organization, we have to understand that we have to invest in our development. We have to maintain people, not only financially. We're not only talking about remuneration, but we have to create agendas. We have to understand where we move into. We have to fulfill projects. We have to hold account on the project, communicate our results. We have to study the needs of our target audiences, and so on and so forth. If the people don't have such an experience before they got united in a civil organization, there should be someone to support them, to accompany their developments. So this is what such organizations as ours do, to help other civil organizations and other people, to help them understand how to survive in different conditions, in future, how to draw attention, how to win the competitions, how to compete properly, how to get united with other civil organizations, how to get united even when you compete for the same money. So there's a lot of different aspects, but there is somebody who is supposed to help the civil organizations. We call it organizational or institutional development, and we implement different consulting, training, funding, or networking programs. So this is the work we do. Thank you very much, Mr. Ruslan. Let's touch upon the financial component, what the civil organizations can count on, what are the limits of such support. Well, it's up to 2.5 million hryvnias. It's quite a good financial support, but you have to understand, but the competition will be quite intense too. And respectively, we should have civil organizations competing which work not less than 1 year, who have proper accounting, they don't have any legal problems, founders of which are not, God forbid, sanctioned in some sanction lists. We will have online consultations, so please join us as long as you have such an opportunity, and let's improve the lives of the veterans together. And I think Mr. Oleksiy will tell us about the areas of activity where the projects can be developing. Thank you very much, Mr. Oleksiy. Let's talk about this, and obviously about the role of the state in this process. Well, first of all, I would like to say that we take pride in the activities of Ukrainian Veterans Foundation. We see every day its 6th or 17th support competition, and they are even known in the United States of America. We had dialogues where our veterans who got the grants, they were implementing their projects, they represented our country on a very intense level. So we appreciate ISAR Yednania's input in support of this project, and it's a perfect example of private state and private partnership, when the government creates opportunities and the civil organizations, they scale them up, and we invest in these civil initiatives, and we move towards creation of the comfortable future for our veterans together. And talking about the areas for the projects, there is no certain framework. We don't orient at certain area of activity. We work together with civil organizations of all forms in terms of building capacity, and building capacity is a key thing here. We provide them with resources to improve their everyday operations, so they could create some environment of some veterans environment in Ukraine. Well, first of all, we have veteran sport actively developing, and again, different ways of rehabilitation of the veterans, the reintegration. This is a pressing issue. Social housing, any types of advice, support of the veterans on the level of their capacity. We have a pilot project, Veterans Assistant, which is scaled up to 9 regions and the city of Kiev. It will be a huge core of people who support the veterans, who accompany the veterans, those demobilized, those who want to find their place in civil lives, and those assistants are going to accompany them. They're being trained in the Centers for Veterans Development. They already started working in Vinnytsia region. It's a paid profession, but what's important, those assistants are either veterans themselves or the member of veterans' families, the members of the families of the perished veterans, because it's only a veteran who can understand a veteran. Only they know what they went through, in what environment they were existing, and only this joint empathy will help to reintegrate the veterans back to civil lives. Thank you, Mr. Oleksiy. Ms. Ruslana, getting back to the competition, so let's try to finalize it. When is the start, where the information can be found, and is the number of the projects you support limited? Well, just like always, I will answer about the question about the number of the projects. We have the documents we work in compliance with, and we have the projects submitted for our competition, so we can support up to 70% of those submitted projects. So we are hoping that it will be a proper number of projects that submit, because ISAR covers those expenses that were not covered before, and it was a serious limitation for the civil organizations. And the launch of competition, well, it's going on a gradual basis. First, there is the expert council being selected, because we have expert council that assesses the project, provides recommendations. Then we launch another stage, the acceptance of applications from the civil organizations. So they submit the applications, they pass technical selection stage. We check whether all of the documents are prepared properly. If they're not, then we return them to you. We explain what documents are drawn incorrectly, and you have 5 days to rectify the mistakes. Then the paperwork and the project go through expert assessment. The experts provide their remarks and recommendations. The competitors take or do not take into account those remarks and recommendations. And then those civil organizations, on the following stage, they can explain why they did or did not take into account the recommendations and remarks of the expert council. Then there are points assigned, and then we identify who are the winners of the competition. Then we enter into agreements. We have to have all the necessary paperwork drawn up as addendums to the agreement. So I would like to say that you have to work very good with your documents. It's very important, so that you don't get disappointed about the fact that it's not only the idea that is necessary, but the documents are important too. What I would like to emphasize again, that the Ukrainian Veterans Foundation surveys the public opinion, and we are about to report our results of this survey which you will be able to get familiarized with, to see what are the problems in the veterans community. For example, there are problems with prosthetics, because people who get prosthetics, they are supposed to go through rehabilitation process in the hospitals. The bunks in the hospitals are not enough, and this prosthetic process is taking a lot of time. So there are already such projects in place on an international level. For example, social housing, where a veteran can be put in a quarters without taking that space in a bunk for other potential wounded warriors in a heavier condition, and they can get rehabilitated in that social housing. In the same way, the veteran sports are developing in Ukraine, and in compliance with the draft law that was adopted before the full-scale invasion, just a couple of days before it. And during a year, many people were busy with other things, but the veterans get reintegrated through sports in the best way. In the best global practices, sports are a component of a psychological rehabilitation. So we focus on veteran sports. We know that infrastructure is not quite ready for that, and we can together prepare this infrastructure for veterans and veteran sports for the veterans who have disabilities. Thank you very much. If we have any questions on the floor, dear colleagues, please introduce yourself. Good morning, Svetlana Tkachuk, Ukrinform. Did you count the number of civil organizations taking care of the veterans support in Ukraine, and what are the areas of veterans support where the government could mostly rely on civil organizations? So is it physical or psychological rehabilitation, maybe collection of documents, or some other areas that civil organizations could deal with better? Well, obviously, every civil organization that has the status of a legal entity should undergo registration. And the Ministry of Justice, they have that register. Everybody can check through it. And almost every civil organization, for what I know in their statutory activity, they have quite a broad list of social services that they provide, including for the veterans. However, to list those who provide social services for the veterans and what is the quality of such services, unfortunately, it's quite difficult to do it now. and such calculations in any case would not be absolutely precise. So where exactly the civil organizations can provide services to the veterans? In what areas? Well, everywhere, in all areas. Well, what are the most efficient in our opinion? Well, yes, we have cases, but we cannot compare what was happening before the full-scale invasion and what's going on now, because the scale and intensity of battle operations and the number of servicemen who become veterans, it grows exponentially. And in fact, nobody was ready for such a scale and such numbers. And it's also people working with the government, and it's also people working with the civil organizations and providing services. So respectively, all those services, apart from registration of something, well, those are the services that can be provided by civil organizations. It's consulting, psychological support. But again, I have to emphasize it, that psychological support should be provided if you don't want to do any harm. You have to control it. It should be provided with the professional psychologists, and Ukrainian Veterans Foundation have their hotline of support. We've described all our steps, all our practice, how we extend such support, and how it can be organized by civil organizations, for example. And I'm giving the floor to Oleksiy. My advice would be to orient not at areas, at sectors, but to look for specific needs, specific requests that may originate from some narrow audience, because the government acts on the scale of the whole country, and they may not be able to identify some local demand which emerges on the regional level. Also, we should orient at the territorial component. For example, there is a large number of veteran hubs being opened in Ukraine. Even in smaller communities, it's really they are really powerful organizations which support local veterans. But again, the focus is not on the areas of activity, but it's more on the demand. Thank you very much for such a question. What we're trying to do is to understand the veterans community better, because veterans movement, it was quite different. Before the year 2014, it was World War II and war in Afghanistan. Then after 2014, the ATO warriors. Now there is an additional cohort of people, and this area is developing. And according to our data, since 2014, there were a couple of thousand of civil organizations registered which work in the area of veterans support. We had this survey recently of the civil organizations who work in the area of veterans support, and if you're interested about this, you can get familiarized with this survey. There is a geography there, and 25% of organizations are in the west, 27 in Kiev, 18 in the east. And talking about the services, the biggest percentage, 79% of the services are psychological support and psychological adaptation, 73% support information activity, 64% legal support, and then organization of events for children, medical support, assistance with employment, and so on and so forth. So those are the results of our survey. We know that in the government sector there are their surveys too. So I think that we have quite a good analytic understanding of what works how in Ukraine, but the situation is changing dynamically with every quarter. and we expect for some changes to happen. We will keep track of them. We've even studied whether there is understanding by the civil organizations which work with the veterans, or the veterans organizations, whether they have understanding of the direction they should move at, because they need networking, they need communication, they need to get together to plan, they need to understand this sphere. So we've planned this support. We've planned to have such a future such conference where the veterans community can plan, I mean the civil society can plan their activity to build a strategy and to build a visionary document, like where we want to be, what are our obstacles, what we have to do. So I think this is the format that we will do in November. So the materials are available. If you're curious about them, we are ready to share the links or the printed versions available here. Thank you very much, Mr. Volodymyr. Very interesting survey. I hope our journalists will be able to study it. If we have any more comments. Good afternoon. Andrei Kucher, the head of the Civil Veterans Union of the Wounded Warriors, Mitsny 300. So the first thing I've heard, first of all, I want to extend my appreciation of your support, but what's important to give the grants to organizations so that they understand what's most important. And I've heard some important things about the documents. Like I, for example, know that the documents are important, but let's be honest, not all of the veterans organizations, even newly created, they work with the full staffing, with accountants. So documents, talking directly, creates a lot of problems. My organization is working. We help dozens of guys on a daily basis, but for me the problem is the documents. So it's more of a suggestion rather than a question. So why creating the problems rather than facilitating them? Well, do take into account the fact that the Russian-Ukrainian war goes on for more than a year and a half, and I can give you an example of more organizations that were created by wounded warriors like me. And then the second question is, does the competition contemplate the support of the projects, the support of the guys who are currently at the forward edge of the battle area, like procurement of those eco flows for them? Thank you. Well, look, talking about the importance of the documents, we all want to live in compliance with the law, where everybody adheres to certain rules, because yes, the documents are important. Let's look on the other side. We are fighting corruption for many years, and then if we cancel those documents for one category, so why not canceling them for other categories? Maybe a solution would be in some trainings. Yes, exactly, this is what I'm trying to say. We started working with ISAR Yednannia, who can provide the administrative support and who can pay for an accountant for you, because if you have a good accountant, it relieves a lot of workload from you. And having a good accountant who deals with those problems like you've mentioned, like supplying the eco flows to the guys on the forward edge. So you supply, you supply the eco flows as a charity contribution, and there is accounting involved. There is always accounting involved. So there should be acceptance certificates certificates, they should be accounted with you. And then you have to have your reports submitted to the tax administration. This is why we invite you to use this opportunity to mitigate the risks in your activity and to take part in this project to improve your administrative activity, because we are all equal in front of the law. We're not getting away from it. Talking about the years of activity, just recently the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine adopted the amendments to the resolution 256 about the procedure of utilization by Ukrainian Veterans Foundation of budget funds. And this year, previously it was 2 years, so the term was reduced to 1 year. Us as an organization financed from the state budget, we have certain restrictions. For example, this resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers, it's not like I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, cool idea, let's do it. No, it doesn't happen this way. There are requirements imposed by the state, and we also have to work on improving our civil organizations to bring them to that institutional level that makes them competitive with other civil organizations. Because I reminded you, for more than 3 years, everybody keeps saying that veterans businesses during some grant programs, they cannot compete with other businesses because the veterans, and it's an objective statement, because the veterans, they refused their life, they put it aside, they went to the front lines to defend their country. Meanwhile, they were not developing, they were not studying, they were not developing their businesses. And all those funds, all those projects are aimed at improving all those organizations to bring them to that level where they are competitive even on a general basis. Volodymyr, if I may, look, those are very good questions, specifically in critical situations, and critical situation is where we are since 2014, and it even deteriorated from 2022. But in case of Ukrainian Veterans Foundation, the funds are of government origin. In our case, those are the funds of USAID, because we implement the project of support of the civil society, and all those expenses are inspected and verified. So here we're talking about the accounting and transparency, accountability and transparency. There are more than 100,000 civil organizations in Ukraine, and not all of them work in a proper way. Many organizations are created by some people for the sake of some fraudulent initiatives. So to identify whether an organization works properly and uses the funds as necessary, well, it's quite difficult given the number of organizations in Ukraine. So this is why there are restrictions and there are contests. There should be no other approach, because those are the budget funds in both cases. And in our case, it's the United States budget funds. But there is a work of fundraisers, there are other types of work. Recently we had a conference where we gathered those who raise funds, and they work with private funds, and we're talking about tens of billions of hryvnias that were raised during last year, and there were opportunities to improve the accounting, and there were cases where the accountants were not always necessary, but we were talking about the private funds, and these are the government funds, and accountability is way more important here. Also, if you have such an opportunity, maybe some of your brothers and nurses, you can get such people involved in your work who can help you with raising of funds, and you can get support for such initiatives in a number of competitions. We have such projects, and there are such projects with other organizations. There are funds available for organizations that are even younger than 1 year, and also there can be, or there may be, private funds, charity funds involved, and it's easier to work with them. And talking about the organizations that are new, I think that we can really be useful, because our mission, our task is to help the small organizations in development so they become more experienced, then they grow bigger, and they can create some movements in those areas where they work. But talking about accountability, we cannot get away from it. And when in 2022, in February and specifically in March, when the aggression and full-scale war unfolded in Ukraine, we had access to international money. We addressed our donors with a request to allow the extension of support, because we were issuing grants in Mariupol, Kherson, Sumy, and elsewhere where it was necessary. We were spending the grants in the areas that we never worked before. So we spent about 200 million hryvnia, because we were understanding that tomorrow there may be no necessity, there will be no one to extend the funds to. But we had auditors coming to us, and they were telling us if those expenses were not accepted as those allowed, we would have had to compensate for all those expenses personally to the donors. So we are forced to work in such a way to avoid any negative consequences that may arise. But we are ready to assist, we are ready to help, to support, we are ready to get the specialists involved to facilitate your work. Just a small comment, because we have more questions. Yeah, I apologize to intervene. I understand transparency, accountability, and everything, but what I'm talking about is when you're saying that we're going along the veterans policy, you have to understand specifics. So let's talk in a more simple language. For example, let's remove this 1 year standard, and we will extend the grants to everybody, and depending on the period the organization is active, let's just limit the ceiling of the grant. For example, okay, I agree with you completely. Let's drop the draft amendment to the resolution 257. Let's sit together and draw it up, and we submit it. Okay, so what do you need from me? Yeah, okay, all right, I agree with you. I agree with you. All right, we have more questions on the floor, please. Wait for the microphone, please. Good morning, esteemed community. I'm the head of the civil organization Zamožnye Selo. We work at the Yednannia territorial community, and we're a partner of Communities Union. We are a partner of ISAR Yednannia. Our advantage is that we work not on the national but on the local level, and we understand what's going on within our community. And now there are warriors in our organization, in our community, that are in the front lines. There are women warriors, and there are also the wives of the perished warriors in our community. And unfortunately, we have a case when one of such women has very serious psychological problems. It's a real case unfolding in front of our eyes. So we've made a round table, and we were trying to find the ways how to help all those categories of population, because it's not only the veterans who are affected, everybody needs help. And it turned out during this round table that we see that what's working well are the equal groups, like when the group of veterans gathers, a group of women veterans, or when the children of those veterans get together, they have the similar problems, but they understand their problems on their level, and they help each other. And during that round table, it turned out the number of such groups is quite extensive, because there were people who were volunteers who donate a lot. He's a man, and he cannot go to the front lines to some specific reasons. It's burning for him, you know. Like he says, the guys are in the front lines and I'm sitting here, no matter how much I support them. So yes, I think that such a project as support of the groups of equal people may be supported by you. It may be quite useful. Yes, right. I'll tell you even more. We have the list of all of the projects in our website, and we have similar projects implemented already. What are they about? Who are the participants? There is financial reporting. Well, you can pick them, you can filter them by areas. What were the projects that we supported? You can sort them by regions, by geography, and you can check out the projects that were already supported. And also there are surveys by ISAR Yednannia, Ukrainian Veterans Foundation, where we clearly survey the veterans who are back to the front lines, the families of the veterans. We are asking them what are their problems, the problems they're facing, and what are the problems they expect to be facing. And there is a very significant percentage of those psychological problems. So it's obvious that the state and other donors are aimed at solving those problems. So one way or another, we support those types of projects anyway. And I would also like to emphasize that we study veterans' environment. We don't make a single step without studying the veterans' environment, veterans' community. We study veterans' community and a public sentiment. So talking, for example, about employment, I'll just give you a small example. 97% of the employers, according to the survey, they say that they are ready to employ veterans. However, at the same time, we survey the veterans, and they say that 25% of the veterans who are retired are in active search of a job, and they cannot find it. So we have to understand all of the target audiences. Unfortunately, we live in parallel worlds, and this reality is developing very dynamically and quickly, and the civil organizations, they can fill or they can help to make those gaps smaller. It's important to work not only with the veterans, but for the veterans too. So you can hold some educational events. When we surveyed the trust to not armed forces but trust to the veterans, it was in December 22. So we were asking the society what they understand by veteran, and 30% were saying those are the veterans of the World War II. So we have to understand what is the society we're living in. We have to understand that one way or another we have to live in this country all together, and we cannot allow those parallel realities to diverge so much that then they eventually collide in some great misunderstanding. Thank you very much, dear friends. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. We're running out of time quite quickly. I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank our active audience for your interest in this topic. I want to thank everybody, and obviously I want to thank our security and defense forces for the opportunity to hold events like this. Stay tuned. We continue working together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.